Morning came pale and clean over the northern edge of Minnesota, brushing the small town of Oak Ridge with a soft, forgiving light. The pine trees swayed gently in the wind that swept down from Lake Superior, carrying the scent of cold water and old wood. For a town that rarely changed, the air felt different this morning, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to stir from the past. Jack Foster killed the engine of his battered pickup truck and stared at the building that was now inexplicably his. At 40, he still carried himself like the soldier he once was, shoulders broad and squared from years building bridges under fire in Afghanistan, jawline cut like granite beneath a faint stubble, short dark brown hair streaked with silver at the temples. His steel-gray eyes, so used to scanning roads for hidden explosives, now studied the sagging wooden storefront of Oak Ridge General with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant duty. The sign above the door hung crooked, one chain broken, and the windows were filmed with decades of dust. Next to him, Duke, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a coat of black and snow-white fur and sharp amber eyes, hopped down from the truck bed. The dog sniffed the frosty ground, ears twitching, then sat by Jack's boot as if waiting for orders. Duke had been his partner in the Army's Search and Rescue Division, trained to find what others could not. Out here in the silence of Oak Ridge, the dog seemed almost restless, as if sensing that something beneath this quiet town was about to surface. From the back seat, Lily's small voice broke through his thoughts. "Is this it, Dad? Is this Grandpa's store?" 8 years old, with her mother's chestnut hair and his stubborn chin, she pressed her face against the window, breath fogging the glass. Her eyes were wide with the kind of wonder only children can muster when faced with decay adults see as hopeless. Jack hadn't seen this place in nearly 20 years. His grandfather, William Foster, had owned and run the store until it closed in the early 90s. It was once a bustling center of town life, a place where people traded, talked, and gathered. But time had reduced it to what the locals now called the town's eyesore. And now, after William's death, it belonged to Jack. The weight of the last 4 years hung heavy on Jack's shoulders as he helped Lily out of the truck. 4 years since cancer took Sarah so quickly, it felt like a grenade had gone off in their lives, leaving him to navigate fatherhood alone. 4 years of military contractors downsizing, of moving from job to job, across 3 states, of watching their savings dwindle while trying to keep Lily's world stable. And now the final blow, the layoff notice that had come just 3 weeks before the letter about William's will. The cold metal of the key bit into Jack's palm as he approached the door. The lock was stiff with disuse, grudgingly turning after several attempts. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo his own misgivings. The smell hit him first, dust, mildew, and something faintly metallic like forgotten coins. The shelves were still lined with empty jars, faded labels clinging to them like memories refusing to let go. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, its cord wrapped in cobwebs. The floorboards creaked under his weight, protesting this intrusion after so many years of silence. Lily slipped her small hand into his, squeezing tight. "It's like a treasure hunt, Dad," she whispered, her eyes darting around the shadowed corners. In that moment, Jack felt a flash of his daughter's resilience, the same quiet strength that had carried her through losing her mother, through 3 new schools in 4 years, through watching her father struggle to hold their life together. Duke moved ahead, nose to the ground, methodically working the space as if they were clearing buildings in Kandahar. The dog's training never truly faded, even years into civilian life. Jack watched as Duke reached the counter, sniffed the edge, then looked back at him with unusual intensity. "You'd hate to see it like this, old man," Jack muttered, brushing his hand along the counter where William once stood, booming with laughter. When Jack was a boy, this place had been magical rows of candy jars, hardware arranged with military precision, the secret stash of comic books William kept under the counter just for him. The day after William's funeral, Jack had been approached by a man in an immaculate Navy suit, Maxwell Bennett, the CEO of Northland Properties. He was in his 50s with carefully combed silver hair, a polished gold watch, and a smile that never reached his eyes. Bennett had made it clear that Northland wanted the property for a new shopping complex, and he had offered more money than Jack had seen in his life. "This place has no future," Bennett had said, tapping his manicured fingers on the counter. "The town needs jobs, economic stimulus. Your grandfather was a good man, but he was holding on to the past. Sell it and start fresh somewhere that isn't dying. Use the money to give your daughter opportunities." Bennett's eyes had lingered on Lily, a calculated softness entering his voice. My son was about her age when I had to make tough choices for his future. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for our children is let go of sentimentality. Jack had politely refused, though the offer had tempted him more than he'd admit. After 15 years of service, he had come back home searching for something. Maybe redemption, maybe purpose. And the rotting store seemed as good a place as any to start, even if he couldn't yet articulate why he needed to hold on to this piece of his past. Lily's excited voice pulled him back to the present. Dad, look what I found. She held up a small collection of old coins, green with age, discovered in a drawer behind the counter. Her face shone with the thrill of exploration, and for a moment Jack saw the store through her eyes, not a burden, but an adventure waiting to unfold. Over the following days, Jack threw himself into cleaning. He hauled broken shelves to the curb, swept decades of dust from the floor, and boarded up a window that the wind had long since claimed. The work was exhausting but familiar. Physical labor had always cleared his mind, given him a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic. Lily helped in her own way, sorting through old papers, arranging salvageable items into careful piles, chattering about turning the space into a super cool home. Each night they'd return to the small room they'd rented at the Oak Ridge Motel, a temporary solution that was stretching longer than Jack had planned. He'd tuck Lily into bed and then sit at the small table, spreadsheets of numbers before him that refused to add up to anything but trouble. The renovation cost, the property taxes, the dwindling remains of his savings, the mortgage payments on a house in Ohio, now listed for sale in a market that wouldn't budge. The arithmetic of a life coming undone. Duke followed Jack everywhere, sniffing corners and scratching at loose floorboards as if the building itself were speaking to him. It was during one of these cleaning sessions that Duke's instincts paid off. The dog stopped at an old oak cabinet in the back office and barked sharply, pawing at its base with unusual urgency. Jack knelt down, running his hands along the worn wood. It was solid, heavy, the kind of craftsmanship that had disappeared decades ago. His fingers found a small irregularity on the underside of the lowest drawer. Inside, taped to the bottom surface, was a yellowed envelope bearing his grandfather's handwriting, "For Jack when the time comes." His heart quickened as he carefully opened the brittle paper. Inside was a single note in William's distinctive script: "Value does not live on the surface, my boy. Look deeper, always deeper." The words hit Jack harder than expected. William had been a man of simple pleasures and straightforward wisdom, but this felt like something else, a message wrapped in secrecy. "What were you hiding, old man?" he murmured, sliding the letter into his pocket. The weight of it seemed to carry more than just paper, as if William had compressed some essential truth into those few words. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Jack sat on the edge of his motel room bed and stared at the note. The television murmured in the background, another pharmaceutical commercial promising relief from ailments he didn't have. His mind drifted to the stack of bills on the table, the call from the bank he'd been avoiding, the school forms for Lily that needed to be completed. Each obligation felt like a stone in his pocket, dragging him down into waters too deep to navigate. His phone buzzed, a text from Bennett. "Offer still stands. Think about your daughter's future." Jack turned the phone face down without replying. He didn't need the reminder of what was at stake. As he continued his work over the next week, Jack uncovered more remnants of the past ledgers dated back to the 1920s, faded photographs of families standing proudly outside the store, and receipts for supplies he couldn't imagine William ever needing: lantern fuel, thick canvas tarps, heavy locks. It dawned on him that the store had once been more than just a place to buy groceries. It had been a hub, a heartbeat for Oak Ridge. One afternoon, as Jack was sweeping the front porch, an elderly woman approached. Margaret Simmons, 77, small and stooped, with a crown of snow-white curls, leaned heavily on a carved walnut cane. Her blue eyes were sharp despite her frailty. "I used to come here as a girl," she said, looking past Jack at the store. "Your grandfather never let anyone go hungry. During the blizzard of '78, this place was the only thing standing between us and starvation. William would extend credit to families who couldn't pay to deliver groceries to the elderly who couldn't make it into town." She paused, her gaze turning to Jack. He was more than a shopkeeper. He was the conscience of Oak Ridge. Her words warmed something in Jack's chest, a small flame of pride for a man he'd known, but perhaps never fully understood. Others followed over the next few days. Old men with stories about secret deliveries William made in the middle of the night, or how he always had a job for anyone who needed one. A retired teacher who spoke of how William had quietly paid for school supplies for children whose parents couldn't afford them. Each story painted a picture of a man whose generosity ran deeper than Jack had realized. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of ripping out rotted floorboards, Jack found Lily sitting cross-legged on the counter, a school worksheet before her. Her pencil tapped against her chin as she frowned at a math problem. "What's the trouble, kiddo?" Jack's voice was rough with sawdust and exhaustion. He'd been pushing himself too hard, sleeping too little, the pressure of their dwindling resources driving him to work faster longer. "It's fractions," Lily sighed dramatically. Mom was good at helping with fractions. The mention of Sarah hit him like it always did, a sudden vacuum in his chest, as if all the air had been sucked out in an instant. He sat beside Lily, forcing himself to breathe through it. "Yeah, she was. But I'm not too shabby myself, you know." As they worked through the problems together, Jack noticed a homemade card poking out from Lily's backpack. He pulled it out gently, construction paper folded in half, decorated with glitter and stickers. "To Mom" was written in Lily's careful handwriting. Inside was a drawing of three stick figures, a tall one with spiky hair, a small one with pigtails, and a woman with a halo. "For Mother's Day," Lily explained quietly. "Ms. Parker said we could make cards for our moms in heaven, too." Jack's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, Lil. Mom would love it." Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Jack found himself back at the store. He couldn't sleep, his mind racing with calculations that never balanced with the weight of being both mother and father, with the gnawing fear that he was failing at both. The store was quiet, moonlight filtering through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Duke followed silently, a faithful shadow at his heels. The dog seemed different here, more alert, as if the building itself held some frequency only he could detect. Jack watched as Duke moved to the back storage area, an area he had barely glanced at before. The dog stopped before a stack of rotting crates, barking once, then looking back at Jack expectantly. Jack moved the crates aside, revealing a section of floor that looked different. The planks were newer, slightly raised, as if someone had repaired them quickly and without care. He crouched, running his calloused fingers along the wood. "What did you find, girl?" he whispered. The thought came to him like a spark. William's letter. Look deeper. He stared at the uneven floorboards and felt a shiver run down his spine. Somewhere beneath his boots, beneath this forgotten store, beneath the dust and rot of 30 lost years, something was waiting. Jack returned to the truck and grabbed his toolbox. With a pry bar, he carefully worked at the edges of the raised section. The wood resisted, then surrendered with a groan. As the first board came loose, a rush of cool air escaped from below, carrying a scent of earth and stone, and something indefinable, something old. One by one, he removed the boards, revealing a square opening roughly 3 feet across. But what made his breath catch was what lay beneath, not dirt or a crawl space, but a metal hatch, rusted at the edges but solid. A ring handle protruded from its center, the kind he'd seen on submarine doors during his military training. The rational part of Jack's mind, the part shaped by 15 years of military engineering, cataloged what he was seeing with professional detachment. The hatch was steel, at least half an inch thick, designed to bear significant weight. The installation was professional, with proper supports built into the surrounding floor joists. This wasn't amateur work. It was deliberate, engineered. With a deep breath, Jack gripped the ring and pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like an old ship's hull groaning, the hatch lifted. The hinges protested, but held, as he swung it open, fully revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Cold air poured up from below, smelling faintly of damp stone and forgotten time. Jack strapped a flashlight to his chest, harness, a habit from his deployment days he'd never shaken, and glanced at Duke. "You ready?" The dog wagged her tail, once a soldier's affirmation, and followed him into the dark. The stairs wound down farther than he expected, 20-30 feet below ground. The walls were lined with brick, skillfully laid and mortared, the work of someone who knew their craft. Jack's mind raced with questions. Why would a small-town shopkeeper build what amounted to a bunker beneath his store? When had this been constructed? And by whom? When they opened into a chamber, Jack stopped short. The space was vast, larger than the entire footprint of the store above. Stone walls lined with brick buttresses gave it the feel of an old cellar or bunker, but the craftsmanship was far more deliberate, almost military. Wooden crates stamped with faded insignia lined the walls, some sealed, some pried open long ago. Jack approached one of the crates, his flashlight beam dancing across its surface. The stamp read, U.S. Army Signal Corps 1918. Inside were field telegraphs, coiled wire, and rusting metal parts wrapped in wax cloth. Another box contained sealed envelopes marked Top Secret in block letters that had faded to the color of dried blood. Jack picked one up, turning it over in his hands. The seal had been broken long ago. Inside was a single sheet of paper, coordinates, names, dates. The paper felt delicate, important, though he couldn't yet grasp its significance. Jesus, William, what were you involved in? Jack whispered, his voice absorbed by the thick walls. Duke moved deeper into the chamber, nose working overtime, tail stiff with focus. Jack followed the beam of his flashlight, revealing more shelves laden with boxes and folders. Each step felt like moving backward in time. A narrow hallway branched off to the left, ending in a heavy oak door banded with iron. It took all his strength to shove it open. Beyond was a small room that looked more like a sanctuary than a storage space. Wooden benches lined the walls, and a faded American flag hung from a hook, its edges frayed by time. On a makeshift table sat a row of journals, dozens of them, their spines cracked but intact. Jack flipped one open and scanned the first page, his heart racing as he began to understand what he was seeing. March 12, 1942. 4 arrived under cover of night. Scientists fleeing Berlin. They will rest here before continuing west. Richardson will escort to the Minnesota border tomorrow. God willing, their research will never fall into Hitler's hands. April 7, 1951. 3 men, 1 woman journalist from Prague. Their papers were burned. New identities arranged through Thompson's contact in Minneapolis. The woman cried when she saw the beds we prepared. Sometimes it's the small mercies that break them, not the great terrors they've fled. The entries continued for decades, each one a snapshot of a hidden chapter of history. People whose names the world never knew passing quietly beneath Oak Ridge on their way to new lives. Some were scientists, others were activists. Many were simply people whose governments had marked them for death, and all of them had passed through this place. As Jack read, footsteps echoed faintly above, heavy, deliberate, and too rhythmic to be random. He froze. Duke's ears pricked up, and a low growl rumbled in her throat. Jack killed the flashlight, plunging the chamber into darkness. The steps stopped, and after a long moment they retreated. Cautiously, Jack climbed back up the stairs. The store above was empty, but the front door, which he was certain he had locked, now stood slightly ajar. A newspaper had been slipped through the way, folded around a single line of text written in blocky, deliberate handwriting. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, Mr. Foster. Jack's military training kicked in. He quickly secured the perimeter, checking windows and the back door. Someone had been watching him, maybe for days. Someone who knew he had found the underground chamber. He replaced the floorboards carefully, making it look undisturbed, then headed back to the motel. All night he lay awake, the journal's contents replaying in his mind. His grandfather had not just been a shopkeeper. He had been part of something vast and important, a network that had saved lives when the world was at its darkest. The next morning, Jack dropped Lily at her new school, a process that tore at him as it always did. The anxiety in her eyes, the brave smile that didn't quite reach them, the way she clutched her backpack straps too tightly. "You'll make friends in no time," he assured her, though they both knew the pattern by now. Just as she would settle in, they would move again. Except this time there was nowhere left to go. The store was their last chance, their final roll of the dice. If Jack couldn't make something of it, they faced a future he couldn't bear to contemplate, living in his truck. Lily taken by social services, everything he'd fought to hold together since Sarah's death crumbling to dust. After the school drop-off, Jack drove directly to the Oak Ridge Sheriff's Department. He needed to report the break-in, even if he couldn't explain everything he'd found. Sheriff Robert Miller was in his mid-40s, with the build of a wrestler, gone slightly soft, broad-shouldered, with a hint of a belly and a sunburned face framed by sandy blonde hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. The sheriff listened to Jack's account of the intruder and the threatening note with a measured skepticism. "This town doesn't see much trouble, Mr. Foster," Miller said, leaning back in his chair, fingers drumming on the edge of his desk. Most likely some kids messing around curious about the old place being opened up again. Jack pushed the note across the desk. Kids don't usually leave threats like this. Miller studied the paper, his expression unreadable. Look, I know William was your grandfather, and I respect that you're trying to fix up that old place. But there's something you should understand about Oak Ridge. This town's had its share of ghosts. Some folks think they're best left at rest. Something about the sheriff's tone raised Jack's hackles. It wasn't just dismissive, it was warning. Are you saying I should ignore a break-in at my property? The sheriff sighed, handing the note back. I'm saying that old buildings have old secrets, and sometimes digging them up causes more problems than it solves. But I'll have a deputy drive by more often, keep an eye on the place. Jack left the sheriff's office with more questions than answers. Miller's reaction suggested he knew something about the store or about William that he wasn't sharing. Back at Oak Ridge General, Jack focused on securing the building properly. He installed new deadbolts, reinforced the back door, and set up motion-activated lights. Simple security measures that wouldn't raise eyebrows, but might deter another intrusion. All the while, his mind kept returning to the chamber below and what it represented. He needed to understand more about what William had been involved in. Jack headed to the Oak Ridge Historical Society, a squat brick building on the edge of town that smelled of paper and linseed oil. Inside, rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, and the air hummed with the quiet tick of an old wall clock. Behind the reception desk sat Eleanor Wright, a woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked brown hair, pulled into a low bun, and green eyes sharp enough to slice through any half-truth. Her linen cardigan and polished brooch made her look more like a university professor than a small-town historian. Jack Foster, she said, recognizing him immediately. You look just like your grandfather, only taller and with worse posture. There was no sentimentality in her assessment, just frank observation. He smiled faintly. I found something in the store. I was hoping you might help me make sense of it. He placed William's journal on the desk, open to a page where the 8-rayed sun symbol appeared repeatedly in the margins. Eleanor's sharpness softened into intrigue. Where did you find this? She asked. Her voice lowered, though they were alone in the building. In the store. There's more, a lot more, Jack replied, watching her carefully. What is it? Eleanor studied the symbol, her finger hovering over it without touching. This is known as the Helio Sigil. During the early Cold War, some underground networks used it to mark safe houses, places where defectors, dissidents, or refugees could hide before being moved again. Jack leaned forward, his voice low. Are you saying my grandfather was part of something like that? Eleanor closed the journal gently, her eyes meeting his with a gravity he hadn't expected. William Foster wasn't just a shopkeeper, Jack. He was part of a chain, one that stretched across the country, and Oak Ridge was one of its links. She led him to a back room where maps covered an entire wall. After World War II and well into the Cold War, there were networks that helped people escape, scientists fleeing Nazis, later dissidents from behind the Iron Curtain, refugees from political persecution. These networks were loosely connected, operated in cells. Most people involved only knew their immediate contacts for safety. Jack studied the maps, seeing the country differently now, not as highways and cities, but as a web of invisible paths, secret routes traveled by those desperate for freedom. And Oak Ridge was part of this, Eleanor nodded, a crucial junction. Its remote location made it perfect for a way station. People could arrive discreetly, rest, receive new paper, then continue their journey. She paused, her gaze direct. Your grandfather's store was the center of it all. The weight of her words pressed on Jack during the drive back. All those stories he'd heard growing up about William's sudden disappearances at night, about strangers staying above the store, weren't just local gossip. They were fragments of a larger truth. His grandfather had been part of history in a way Jack had never imagined. When he picked up Lily from school, her eyes were red-rimmed, her shoulders slumped. What happened, sweetheart? He asked, crouching to her level in the school parking lot. Lily sniffled, trying to hold back tears. Tommy Miller said we live in the ghost store, and that's why I don't have a mom. He said ghosts took her. Jack's chest tightened with anger and helplessness. He pulled Lily into a hug, feeling her small body tremble against his. Tommy Miller doesn't know anything about us or about Mom. She didn't leave because she wanted to remember. She got very sick. Lily nodded against his shoulder. I know, But why do we have to live in that scary old store? I miss our house. I miss my friends. The question hit Jack like a physical blow. He had been so caught up in the discovery beneath the store and the financial pressures bearing down on them that he hadn't fully considered how all this looked through Lily's eyes. To her, the store wasn't a historical discovery or their last financial hope. It was just another disruption, another loss in a life that had seen too many already. Back at the motel, Jack helped Lily with her homework, then ordered pizza, a rare treat that brightened her mood. As she ate, he pulled out a notepad and began sketching. What if the store wasn't scary, he asked. What if we fixed it up, made part of it our home, and turned the front into something new? Lily chewed thoughtfully. Like what? Jack smiled, an idea forming. What about a bookstore with a special kids section just for you and your friends? It was a long shot, financially almost impossible given their current situation, but Lily's eyes lit up at the possibility. Dad, we could have bean bags in a storytime corner, and maybe even a little stage for plays. Her excitement was infectious, and for a moment Jack allowed himself to imagine it too. A fresh start, a purpose, a place where Lily could put down roots at last. After tucking her in, Jack returned to the store alone. He needed to continue exploring the chamber to understand more of what William had been protecting all these years. Duke accompanied him, ever vigilant, as they descended into the underground space. This time Jack came prepared with better lights and a camera. He began methodically documenting everything: the crates, the journals, the layout of the space. His engineer's mind mapped the structure, noting the craftsmanship, the ventilation system that somehow maintained air circulation without electricity, the drainage channels that kept the space dry despite being underground. As he photographed a shelf of artifacts, a small metal box caught his eye. It was locked, but the mechanism was simple enough that his pocketknife's slim blade could manipulate it. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a silver key engraved with the 8-rayed sun symbol. Jack turned it over in his hand, wondering what it might open. Another door in this labyrinth, a different location entirely. The questions multiplied with each discovery. A distant sound from above made him freeze. Duke's ears swiveled toward the noise, footsteps again, but multiple sets this time. Jack quickly killed the lights and motioned for Duke to stay close. They crept up the stairs, pausing just below the hatch to listen. Voices murmured above, too indistinct to make out words, but clear enough that Jack could tell there were at least 2 people. He eased the hatch open a fraction of an inch, risking a glance into the store. 2 men in dark clothing were systematically going through the space, lifting floorboards, tapping walls, searching methodically. Their movements were precise, professional, not vandals or curious teenagers, but people who knew exactly what they were looking for. Jack's hand moved instinctively to his hip, where his service weapon would have been during deployment. The gesture, automatic after years in combat zones, found nothing: a civilian now unarmed and facing unknown threats in what should have been his safe haven. He eased the hatch closed without a sound and retreated down the stairs. There was another way out. He'd seen it in his explorations, a narrow tunnel branching off from the main chamber. Jack didn't know where it led, but it had to be better than confronting the intruders directly. With Duke at his side, he moved through the darkness, one hand on the wall to guide him. The tunnel was tight, forcing him to hunch over. After about 50 yards, it began to slope upward, eventually ending at what appeared to be a dead end. Jack pushed against the ceiling, feeling it give slightly. A trap door covered with earth and roots. It took all his strength to force it open. Earth and debris rained down as he pushed through, emerging into the night air, behind what he recognized as the old community church 100 yards from the store. From this vantage point, he could see his truck still parked in front, and now another vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows. Jack pulled out his phone to call the sheriff, but stopped himself. Miller's earlier warning echoed in his mind. The sheriff had practically told him to leave the past buried. Would he actually help? Or was he somehow connected to whatever was happening? Instead, Jack watched from the shadows as the men eventually emerged from the store, clearly frustrated, and drove away. Only when the SUV's taillights had disappeared down the road did he return to the store, Duke alert at his side. The place had been thoroughly searched. Drawers emptied, shelving units moved, even some of the wall panels pried loose. But the intruders hadn't found the hatch. Jack had disguised it too well after his first exploration. His phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Foster, walk away while you still can. The threat only hardened his resolve. Jack spent the rest of the night securing the hidden entrance to the underground chamber, then making the store appear as normal as possible before picking up Lily for school in the morning. As days passed, Jack developed a routine. Mornings were for Lily breakfast, school drop-off, attending to her needs. Days were split between job hunting and store renovations that the town could see, fixing the roof, replacing broken windows, painting the exterior. Nights after Lily was asleep at the motel were for the secret work, exploring the chamber, documenting its contents, trying to understand the full scope of what William had been involved in. Eleanor from the Historical Society became a valuable ally, helping him decipher the journals and identify the historical significance of various artifacts. She explained how the network had operated, moving people along a chain of safe houses from danger to safety. But not everyone shared Eleanor's enthusiasm. Bennett returned a week after the first offer, this time with a smile that felt more like a threat. "Double the offer," he said, placing a glossy contract on the dusty counter. "But if you don't sign soon, the town council might see this as an impediment to development, and that could get complicated. Building inspectors, code violations, old buildings like this often have issues." Jack folded his arms across his chest. "I said no." Bennett's smile tightened. "I admire your sentiment, Foster, truly. But sentiment doesn't pay bills, and it certainly doesn't create a stable home for a child." He nodded toward a photograph of Lily that Jack had placed on the counter. "Children need security, consistency. Can you honestly provide that here in this wreck, with your finances as they stand?" The question cut deep precisely because it echoed Jack's own darkest fears. Could he provide for Lily? Was he being selfish, holding on to the store when selling could give her the stability she desperately needed? "I'll let you think about it," Bennett said, leaving the contract behind. "For your daughter's sake, I hope you make the right choice." After Bennett left, Jack sat alone in the center of the empty store, a single oil lamp casting soft golden light on the cracked floorboards. He thought of his years overseas, the endless noise, the chaos, and felt the weight of the stillness pressing against him. It wasn't just a building, it was a piece of his grandfather, of a history he barely understood, and he could feel that history pressing against the walls, whispering for him to keep digging. That night, when he picked up Lily from her after-school program, she was clutching a drawing. "It's our bookstore, Dad," she explained, pointing to the colorful storefront she'd created, complete with a Foster Family Book Series sign and stick figures representing the two of them. "I even made a special room for Duke," she added, indicating a small area labeled Dog Zone. "And look, I drew Mom watching over us from heaven." Sure enough, a smiling figure with wings floated above the scene. The innocence of it, the pure hope in her vision, nearly broke him. Here was his daughter, who had endured more loss in 8 years than many face in a lifetime, still believing in possibilities, still trusting that her father could make this work. Jack knelt and pulled her close. "It's perfect, Lil, absolutely perfect." Later, after they'd eaten dinner at the diner and he'd tucked her in at the motel, Jack returned to the store with renewed determination. He wouldn't sell, not to Bennett, not to anyone. Whatever William had protected here was worth preserving, and somehow he would find a way to make it work financially too. Duke suddenly barked from the back room, her ears pinned forward. Jack followed her to the old storage area, to the section of wall they hadn't yet explored. The dog was scratching insistently at the base of the bricks. Jack examined the wall, carefully tapping it with his knuckles. The sound that returned was hollow, different from the surrounding sections. With a small hammer, he gently tested the mortar between bricks. It crumbled more easily here, as if it had been applied more recently with less care than the original construction. Working methodically, he removed enough bricks to reveal what lay beyond, another tunnel, narrower than the first, stretching into darkness. This one had been sealed off, deliberately hidden even from those who knew about the main chamber. Jack hesitated at the threshold. Whatever lay down this passage, his grandfather had wanted it concealed, perhaps from everyone, even those involved in the network. Should he proceed or respect William's apparent wish to keep this particular secret buried? Duke made the decision for him, slipping through the opening and disappearing into the darkness. "Duke," Jack whispered urgently, then cursed under his breath. He had no choice but to follow. The passage descended sharply, the air growing colder and damper with each step. Jack's flashlight beam caught glimpses of support beams, electrical conduits, long dead pipes that might once have carried water. This tunnel was different from the others, more hastily constructed, utilitarian, rather than carefully engineered. After what felt like 100 yards, the passage opened into a small, circular chamber. Unlike the main room above, this space was sparse, almost barren. A metal desk sat in the center, its surface empty, save for a thick layer of dust. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their drawers hanging open as if they'd been emptied in a hurry. Jack swept his flashlight around the space, trying to understand its purpose. On the far wall, something caught the light, a large map of the United States yellowed with age. Red pins dotted locations across the country, connected by thread that created a complex web. Beneath the map, a single word had been written in bold letters: Helios. As Jack approached the map for a closer look, his foot struck something on the floor, a small leather-bound book that had fallen beneath the desk. He picked it up, blowing off decades of dust. The cover bore no title, but the first page contained a single line in William's handwriting: "The truth must survive, even if we do not." The pages that followed contained what looked like a code columns of numbers and letters that made no immediate sense. Jack flipped through, looking for anything recognizable, when a loose photograph slipped from between the pages. The black and white image showed a group of men in military uniform standing before what appeared to be a laboratory entrance. In the background, partially visible, was a device of some kind, large, complex, unlike anything Jack had seen before. The men's faces had been deliberately blurred except for one, a young William Foster, looking solemn and determined. On the back of the photograph, a date, July 16, 1945. And below it, a location that made Jack's blood run cold: Alamogordo, New Mexico. Jack knew that date, that location. Every military engineer did. It was Trinity, the first detonation of a nuclear weapon in human history. What had his grandfather been doing there? And what connection did it have to the network of safe houses, to the people William had helped escape over the decades? The sound of a door slamming above jolted Jack back to the present. Someone had entered the store. Duke growled low in her throat, hackles rising. Jack quickly pocketed the photograph and book, then led Duke back through the tunnel, moving as quietly as possible. As they neared the opening they'd created, Jack could hear voices above, one he recognized as Sheriff Miller's, the other unfamiliar but authoritative. They were standing directly above the hidden chamber. "If Foster keeps digging, this whole operation could be exposed," the unknown voice said. "Bennett wants this contained, and frankly, so do I. Oak Ridge has built its new prosperity on forgetting the past. We can't afford for it to resurface now." Miller's response was measured. "The man's just trying to renovate his grandfather's store. He has a kid to support. But he's found something, hasn't he?" The question hung in the air unanswered. Jack held his breath, pressing against the tunnel wall, Duke silent beside him. After what felt like an eternity, the voices moved away, footsteps receding toward the front of the store. When they were gone, Jack quickly replaced the bricks he'd removed, making the wall appear undisturbed. His mind raced with implications. Miller, Bennett, this unknown person, they were all connected, somehow all interested in keeping whatever was beneath Oak Ridge General buried. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He lay on the motel bed, staring at the ceiling as Lily's gentle breathing filled the room. The photograph from the hidden chamber lay on his chest, a weight more significant than its paper and ink. His grandfather had been at Trinity. Had he been involved in the Manhattan Project? And if so, how did that connect to the refugee network he'd later operated? Jack thought of Bennett's repeated offers, the warning notes, the break-ins. This wasn't just about prime real estate or a shopping complex. There was something here that powerful people wanted to remain hidden, something tied to William's past and to the foundations of Oak Ridge itself. As dawn broke, Jack made his decision. He wouldn't sell. He wouldn't walk away. Whatever William had been protecting all these years, whatever truth lay beneath the store, it deserved to be preserved, to be known. And somehow he would find a way to do that while still giving Lily the stable home she needed. He gently woke his daughter, brushing hair from her forehead. "Hey, sleepyhead, how do you feel about moving into the store today? We could set up our sleeping bags in the back office, make it an adventure while we fix the place up." Lily rubbed her eyes, then smiled, a real smile, the kind he hadn't seen often enough since Sarah died. "Like camping with Duke, too?" Jack nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Just like camping, the three of us starting our new life." And silently he added a promise to William, to the people his grandfather had helped, and to the history buried beneath their feet: "I will protect what you built. I will uncover the truth. I will make sure it survives." The first autumn storm swept through Oak Ridge 2 days after Jack discovered the second hidden tunnel. It rattled the windows of the old general store and made the aging wooden frame creak like a ship in heavy seas. Inside, sheltered from the howling wind, Jack and Lily had created a makeshift camp in the back office. Two sleeping bags lay on inflatable mattresses, a battery-powered lantern between them casting a warm glow across their temporary home. Lily sat cross-legged on her sleeping bag, sorting through a box of treasures she'd discovered around the store, faded postcards from places she'd never seen. Glass marbles worn smooth by decades of play, a tin soldier missing one arm but still standing proud. Her face glowed with contentment, the adventure of living in the store temporarily overshadowing the instability of their situation. "This one's from Paris," she announced, holding up a yellowed postcard showing the Eiffel Tower. "Grandpa William must have gone there, right?" Jack looked up from the electrical panel. He was rewiring a task made more challenging by the flashlight clenched between his teeth. "Maybe," he mumbled through the obstruction, not wanting to explain that his grandfather had likely never left Minnesota. The postcard was probably from one of the many people William had helped, a memento of the freedom they'd found after passing through Oak Ridge. Sleep came easily to Lily that night, exhausted from a day of exploration and homework. Jack, however, remained wide awake, his mind racing with questions about the photograph he'd discovered. The image of William standing near the Trinity test site haunted him. What role had his grandfather played in the development of nuclear weapons? And how did that connect to his later work helping refugees? When Lily's breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep, Jack slipped out from his sleeping bag. Duke lifted her head, watching as he pulled on his boots. "Stay," he whispered. "Guard Lily." The dog settled back down, her body protectively close to the sleeping child. Jack descended into the underground chamber this time, carrying not just a flashlight but a digital camera and notebook. If powerful people wanted this history erased, he needed to document everything before it could disappear. The main chamber felt different at night, the silence more profound, as if the weight of history pressed down more heavily in the darkness. He began methodically photographing each journal, each artifact, working his way through the chamber, section by section. As he turned the pages of one journal from 1947, a name jumped out at him: Dr. Laszlo Kovács, Hungarian physicist, evacuated via Montreal. The entry detailed how William had sheltered Kovács for 3 days before arranging transport north. Jack had heard that name before in his engineering courses. Kovács had made significant contributions to reactor design in the post-war years. Had William been part of an operation rescuing scientists from Soviet control? A loose page fell from between the journal entries, a letter on thin paper, the handwriting cramped and urgent. "Dear Foster, they are watching us more closely now. 3 of our Munich contacts disappeared last week. The network from Dresden has gone silent. We must assume compromise. Destroy this after reading. Remember the contingency plan for the package. History depends on it, K." The date on the letter was September 48. Jack carefully photographed it, then continued his documentation. By the time he finished, his camera's memory card was full, and dawn was approaching. He needed to get back before Lily woke. As he climbed the stairs, Jack's mind pieced together fragments of the puzzle. William had been at Trinity, had some connection to the Manhattan Project, and later became part of a network helping scientists and others escape from behind the Iron Curtain. But what was the package mentioned in the letter? And why were Bennett and others so determined to keep it buried? The next morning brought a new challenge. As Jack prepared Lily's lunch for school, his phone pinged with an email from First National Bank of Oak Ridge. His application for a small business loan had been denied, without explanation. Without the loan, his plans to renovate the store and transform it into a viable business, the bookstore Lily dreamed of, were dead before they could begin. A second email arrived minutes later from the Ohio real estate agent. The offer on their former house had fallen through. The buyer had backed out at the last minute, leaving them with a property they couldn't afford and couldn't sell. Jack's financial news tightened another notch. They had 6 weeks of savings left maximum. After that, the choices became impossible. He couldn't let Lily see his desperation, so he plastered on a smile as he zipped up her backpack and ushered her to the truck for school. Lily's face fell as they pulled up to the elementary building. "Do I have to go?" Jack turned to face his daughter, noticing the dark circles under her eyes that mirrored his own. "What's wrong, Lil? Is it Tommy Miller again?" She shook her head, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "No, it's just..." I don't know anyone here. And Miss Parker wants parents to come for career day next week, and her voice trailed off. And I don't have a mom to come, Jack finished silently. The unspoken weight of Sarah's absence hung between them heavier some days than others. Tell you what, Jack leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. I'll come for career day and tell everyone about building bridges in Afghanistan. And maybe, he added, seeing her eyes brighten slightly, I'll bring some of Grandpa William's cool stuff to show your class. How about that? Lily's smile returned small but genuine. Promise, Jack crossed his heart, ignoring the twist of anxiety about whether he'd have gas money for the truck by next week. Promise. After dropping Lily off, Jack drove directly to the Oak Ridge Historical Society. Eleanor Wright was already at her desk, half-moon reading glasses perched on her nose, as she cataloged a collection of aged photographs. Without preamble, Jack placed the Trinity photograph on her desk. I need to know what my grandfather was doing here. Eleanor's expression shifted from surprise to caution. She glanced toward the door, then rose and locked it before returning to examine the photograph. Where did you find this? In a hidden room beneath the store. There's a second chamber sealed off from the main one. She studied the image carefully, her finger hovering over William's youthful face. The Manhattan Project recruited from all backgrounds, physicists, yes, but also engineers, technicians, support staff. Your grandfather was a skilled electrician before he opened the store. From what little he ever told me, he helped with some of the technical installations at Los Alamos. Jack leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. What does this have to do with the refugee network? Why would Bennett and others want to bury this history? Eleanor removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. It's complicated, Jack. After the war, many scientists who worked on the bomb had regrets. Some became vocal opponents of nuclear proliferation. Others went further, actively working to ensure the technology wouldn't spread or would be contained. William never spoke of his exact role, but I believe the network he helped run wasn't just about saving people from persecution. It was about controlling nuclear secrets. Jack finished, the pieces falling into place. They were extracting scientists who might otherwise have been forced to work for the Soviets. Or other entities, Eleanor added quietly. Not all threats come from nation-states. A chill ran through Jack at the implication. The package mentioned in one of the letters I found, could it be technical information, designs materials? Eleanor shook her head. I don't know, but whatever it is, if Bennett is involved in trying to suppress it, the stakes are high. The Bennett family has been in Oak Ridge for generations. They've always had connections to government contractors, defense industries. Jack stood abruptly, his mind racing. I need to find this package before they do. As he turned to leave, Eleanor caught his arm. Be careful, Jack. William once told me that some truths are protected not because they're valuable, but because they're dangerous. The warning echoed in Jack's mind as he drove to his next destination, the Oak Ridge Public Library. If he was going to understand what he was dealing with, he needed more historical context than Eleanor could provide. The library was small but surprisingly well-stocked, with a local history section that took up an entire corner of the building. Jack spent hours poring over dusty volumes chronicling the town's past. Oak Ridge had been founded in the late 1800s as a lumber town, but had transformed during World War II when a munitions factory opened nearby. The population had swelled, then contracted after the war ended. William had opened his store in 1936, operating it continuously, except for a 2-year period from 1944 to 1946, the exact time frame of the Manhattan Project. A slim volume caught Jack's attention. Oak Ridge at War, a Photographic History. He flipped through until a familiar face stopped him cold. There, in a grainy black-and-white image, stood a much younger Maxwell Bennett's father, James Bennett, wearing an Army uniform with intelligence insignia. The caption read, Lieutenant James Bennett returns home 1946 after classified service. Jack photographed the page with his phone, then continued searching. Nothing else jumped out until he reached the back of the book where a fold-out map showed Oak Ridge as it had existed in 1950. What caught his eye wasn't what was shown, but what was missing: a network of tunnels that had supposedly been built as civil defense shelters during the early Cold War. The tunnels formed a web beneath the town center, with multiple access points, including one that appeared to connect directly to the area beneath Oak Ridge General. The picture was becoming clearer, if more disturbing. William hadn't just built a chamber beneath his store. He'd tapped into a pre-existing network of tunnels that ran throughout Oak Ridge, a network that had been deliberately erased from public records. Jack's phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, final warning." Rather than intimidating him, the threat only strengthened his resolve. Someone was watching him, tracking his movements closely enough to know he was researching the town's history, which meant they were afraid of what he might find. That afternoon, Jack received a call from Lily's school. She had fallen on the playground, twisted her ankle, and needed to be picked up. When he arrived at the nurse's office, Lily sat on the edge of a cot, her ankle wrapped and eyes red from crying. As he carried her to the truck, Jack noticed a black SUV parked across the street, the same vehicle he'd seen outside the store the night of the break-in. It pulled away as soon as he spotted it, but the message was clear: they were watching not just him, but Lily too. The realization transformed his concern into cold fury. He could accept threats against himself, but Lily was off limits. As they drove back to the store, Jack made a decision. It was time to seek allies who could help protect them both. Howard Jenkins was not what Jack had expected. The 65-year-old former carpenter who showed up at the store that evening looked more like a retired college professor than someone with calloused hands from decades of physical labor. His beard was neatly trimmed, silver white against dark skin, and his eyes carried the quiet assessment of a man who measured twice before cutting once. "My grandmother passed through here in '51. Howard explained, his voice a low rumble that filled the empty store. "Czech journalist. Would have been arrested if she'd stayed in Prague. William got her papers, kept her safe until she could reach Canada. She never forgot." Jack's eyebrows rose. "She told you about this place?" Howard nodded slowly. "On her deathbed. Asked me to check on William someday, make sure he was okay. By the time I made it up here 10 years ago, he was already sick. Dementia taking its toll. But he recognized my grandmother's name, squeezed my hand, told me where to find his personal journals if anything ever happened to the store." Jack glanced toward the back office where Lily was resting with Duke out of earshot. "So you know what's down there?" "Some of it," Howard admitted. "The main chamber, the people William helped. But he hinted at something else, something even the network members weren't privy to. A final mission he'd been entrusted with." "The package," Jack whispered. Howard's eyes widened slightly. "You found something." Jack described the second hidden tunnel, the sparse room, with the map, the letter mentioning the package, and the Trinity photograph. With each detail, Howard's expression grew more grave. "William didn't just help run the network here. He was one of its architects," Howard said finally. "The kind of man others trusted with their deepest secrets. If he was protecting something from those days—" He left the thought unfinished. Jack lowered his voice further. "Bennett's people are watching us. They've threatened me, broken in, and now they're showing up near my daughter's school. I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Howard's jaw tightened. "Bennett, that family has been the shadow government of Oak Ridge for 3 generations. James Bennett ran counterintelligence operations during and after the war. Maxwell inherited not just his money, but his connections, defense contracts, security firms, political influence. If he wants what William was protecting, it's not for historical preservation." Jack's mind flashed to the denied bank loan, the failed house sale, the increasing pressure from all sides. "He's trying to force me out, financially, physically, however he can." Howard nodded grimly. "And he has the resources to do it. But," he added with a glint of determination, "he doesn't know what we know. And he doesn't have what William left behind." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Jack and Howard descended into the underground chamber. With Howard's knowledge of William's personal records and Jack's discovery of the second tunnel, they began a more focused search. Howard knew where to look for hidden compartments, false bottoms in drawers, loose bricks that concealed small caches. In one such hiding spot, behind a shelf of war-era radio equipment, they found a small, leather-bound address book. The entries were in code, but Howard recognized the pattern, a simple substitution cipher William had used in his personal correspondence. "We can decode this cross-reference with the journals," Howard explained. "Might give us names of others who were involved, people who might still be alive, who might know what the package is." As they continued searching, Jack's flashlight beam caught something unusual, a brick in the wall with a small mark etched into its surface. The 8-rayed sun symbol. "Howard, look at this." The older man ran his fingers over the marking, then pressed the brick. It moved slightly, revealing it wasn't mortared in place like the others. With careful manipulation, the brick slid out completely, revealing a small cavity behind it. Inside sat a metal lockbox no larger than a thick book. It was secured with a padlock bearing no keyhole, only a circular indentation marked with the now familiar sun symbol. The key, Jack breathed, reaching into his pocket for the silver key he had found days earlier. The shape matched perfectly. With trembling fingers, he fitted the key into the indentation and turned it. The lockbox clicked open, revealing its contents, a stack of microfilm reels, each labeled with a date ranging from 1945 to 1962, and a small notebook with William's handwriting. The first page contained a simple message: for Jack, when the truth can no longer remain buried. Howard stared at the microfilm reels. This is what they're looking for. Whatever's on these reels, Bennett's willing to go to extreme lengths to keep it hidden. Jack carefully examined the notebook. It contained what appeared to be a log tracking the movement and security of whatever the package was, with entries spanning decades. The most recent entry was dated just 2 years ago, before William's dementia had progressed too far. Package secure. Final resting place prepared. Key with M. God forgive us for what we created and give us strength to ensure it never sees light again. The hairs on Jack's neck stood on end. What could be so dangerous that William, a man who had helped save countless lives, would pray for forgiveness for creating it? Howard's expression was equally troubled. We need to find out what's on these reels, and we need to do it somewhere safe away from Bennett's eyes. They agreed to meet the next day at Howard's cabin outside town, a location less likely to be under surveillance than the store or motel. As they ascended from the chamber, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Bennett's warnings had escalated from vague threats to physical intimidation. How much further would he go? Morning brought unexpected problems. Jack's truck refused to start, the engine clicking uselessly when he turned the key. Popping the hood revealed the issue immediately. Someone had removed several critical components overnight. Not vandalism, but deliberate sabotage designed to strand them at the store. Howard, who'd slept in his car nearby as an extra precaution, drove them to school instead. As Lily climbed out of the back seat, she turned to Jack with unexpected seriousness. Dad, is someone trying to make us leave Oak Ridge? Jack knelt to her level, surprised by her perception. What makes you ask that, Lil? Her small shoulders straightened with a determination that reminded him painfully of Sarah. I heard you talking with Mr. Howard last night, and Tommy Miller said his dad told him we'd be gone soon because important people don't want us here. Anger flared in Jack's chest, not just at Bennett's machinations, but at the casual cruelty of involving a child. Listen to me, he said, holding Lily's gaze. Some people might want us to leave, but they don't decide what we do. We do, and we're staying because this place matters, because Grandpa William's store is important. Okay. Lily nodded solemnly. Is it because of the secret room under the floor? Jack nearly fell backward in shock. How do you— I followed Duke down there once when you were fixing the roof, she admitted. I didn't touch anything, I promise. But I saw the books and the boxes. Was Grandpa William like a spy or something? Jack struggled to find the right words, balancing truth against protection. Not exactly a spy, but he did help people who were in danger. He kept them safe until they could find new homes. Lily's eyes widened. Like a superhero. A smile tugged at Jack's mouth, despite everything. Yeah, kind of like that. A quiet superhero who helped people without anyone knowing. Her face lit up with pride. That's so cool. Can I be like Grandpa William when I grow up? The innocent question pierced Jack's heart. What would William think of his legacy being passed to his great-granddaughter? Would he be proud or terrified that the dangers he'd faced might someday touch her too? You already are like him, Jack said softly. You're brave and kind, and you notice things other people miss. But for now, let's keep Grandpa's secret room just between us, okay? Like a special mission. Lily nodded seriously, then hugged him tight before running toward the school entrance. Jack watched until she disappeared inside, then turned to Howard with a grim expression. We need to move quickly. Bennett's people are talking to Sheriff Miller, and now Miller's son is spreading information to Lily's classmates. Howard nodded, his face etched with concern. Let's get those microfilm reels somewhere safe and figure out what's on them. I've got a friend at the university in St. Paul who might help us. They drove first to the store to retrieve the lockbox, taking circuitous routes and doubling back several times to ensure they weren't followed. Jack's military training kicked in as he scanned for tails, noting vehicle descriptions, checking for the same faces appearing in different locations. At the store, they found the front door unlocked, despite Jack's certainty that he'd secured it before leaving. Inside, subtle signs of intrusion were everywhere. A chair slightly out of position. Dust patterns disturbed the lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne. Duke, who'd been left behind to guard the store, greeted them anxiously, her behavior suggesting she'd been locked in the back room. Jack checked the hidden entrance to the underground chamber while Howard stood watch. The hatch remained concealed, but fresh scratches on the floorboards indicated someone had been searching for it. "They're getting desperate," Howard murmured, as they quickly gathered the lockbox and essential documents. "We need to get out of here before they come back." They were halfway to Howard's cabin when Jack's phone rang. Eleanor Wright's name flashed on the screen. "Get to the Historical Society now." Her voice was tight with urgency. "Bennett's people were just here asking about William's personal effects. They had some kind of warrant. I stalled them, but they'll be back." Jack gripped the phone tighter. "We're on our way." Eleanor was waiting by the back door when they arrived, her usual composed demeanor replaced by tense vigilance. She ushered them into her private office and locked the door behind them. "Two men in suits claiming to be from the Department of Energy's Historical Records Division," she explained. "They had paperwork authorizing them to collect any documents related to the Manhattan Project or post-war atomic energy programs for national security review. It's nonsense, the DOE doesn't operate that way, but the letterhead looked legitimate enough to fool most people." Jack placed the lockbox on her desk. "We found this, microfilm reels and a logbook. We think it's what they're looking for, but we need to know what's on them." Eleanor's eyes widened at the sight of the sun symbol on the box. "You opened it." Howard nodded. "The key was hidden in the main chamber." Her fingers traced the symbol reverently. "I've only seen drawings of this box. William mentioned it once, said it contained truths that could never see daylight." "Do you have a microfilm reader?" Jack asked, anxiety building with each passing minute. She shook her head. "Not here, the public library does, but too public." Howard finished. "My friend at the university could help, but that's a 2-hour drive and I'm not sure we have that kind of time." Jack's mind raced through options. "What about the high school? Don't they have an old media lab for the student newspaper?" Eleanor snapped her fingers. "Yes, and the media teacher Martin Chen is a friend. He'd let us use the equipment, no questions asked." They moved quickly, transferring the lockbox to Howard's car and taking back roads to Oak Ridge High School. Martin Chen proved to be exactly the ally they needed, a middle-aged man with a passionate belief in journalistic integrity who understood immediately the need for discretion when Eleanor mentioned historical preservation at risk. The media lab was empty during lunch period, giving them a brief window of privacy. Martin set up the microfilm reader, then tactfully excused himself, promising to keep watch in the hallway. Jack loaded the first reel with trembling hands. The film contained technical drawings, detailed schematics for what appeared to be components of a nuclear device, but with modifications unlike anything in standard designs. Page after page of calculations, material, specifications, test results. Interspersed throughout were memos on official letterhead, many bearing top-secret stamps and signatures from military officials and scientists whose names Jack recognized from history books. The second reel was different surveillance photographs and reports tracking Soviet intelligence efforts to obtain American nuclear secrets. Names were circled, connections drawn between scientists, engineers, military personnel. Some were marked compromised, others secured, a few simply eliminated. Howard leaned closer, his expression darkening. "This looks like a counterintelligence operation targeting Soviet attempts to infiltrate the nuclear program, and some of these eliminated individuals." He trailed off, the implication hanging in the air. The third reel brought the most disturbing content yet documentation of something called Project Helios. The opening page described it as a fail-safe mechanism of last resort designed to render nuclear material permanently unusable in the event of compromise. Jack froze on a page containing what appeared to be William's handwriting. "Helios prototype successfully tested at Alamogordo Secondary Site, July 17, 1945. Complete molecular destabilization achieved within containment radius. Recommend immediate classification beyond top secret. This is not a weapon. It is an abomination that must never be deployed. Jack and Howard exchanged horrified glances. They developed something during the Trinity test period, Jack whispered. Something even worse than the atomic bomb itself. Eleanor's face had gone pale. William once told me his greatest fear was that in trying to end one war, they'd created the seeds of something far worse. I thought he was speaking metaphorically about nuclear proliferation, but the implications crashed over Jack like a physical blow. His grandfather hadn't just helped refugees escape persecution. He had been guarding information about a technology so dangerous that its very existence had been erased from history. A technology that Maxwell Bennett, with his defense industry connections, apparently wanted to find. And the package, Jack flipped frantically through William's logbook. It's not these records. The records just explain what the package is. The package itself is something physical, something William hid. The final entry in the logbook suddenly took on terrifying clarity. Package secure, final resting place prepared. William had hidden whatever the Helios prototype was, or perhaps its critical components somewhere only he knew. Their grim revelations were interrupted by Martin Chen rushing back into the room. "You need to leave, now. Sheriff Miller just pulled into the parking lot with 2 men in suits. They're heading this way." They quickly gathered the microfilm and documents, Howard taking the reels while Jack secured the logbook in his jacket. Eleanor led them through a back exit normally used by the yearbook staff for smoke breaks, emerging into the staff parking lot just as Sheriff Miller's voice echoed down the main hallway. "We'll take my car," Eleanor insisted. "They'll be watching for Howard's." As they pulled out of the lot, Jack caught a glimpse of Miller emerging from the school speaking urgently into a radio. The sheriff looked directly at their departing vehicle, and for an instant their eyes met. Miller's expression wasn't anger or determination, but something more complex, resignation tinged with what might have been regret. "They've called in serious backup," Howard noted grimly, watching the rearview mirror as 2 black SUVs pulled into the school lot. "Those aren't local deputies." Eleanor drove with surprising skill for a historian, taking side streets and service roads to avoid main thoroughfares. "My father was a bootlegger during Prohibition," she explained, noticing Jack's surprised expression. "He taught me how to drive before I could see over the steering wheel." Jack's phone vibrated a text from an unknown number that sent ice through his veins. "Your daughter is safe with us. Exchange at the store. 1 hour. Come alone." Attached was a photo of Lily sitting in what appeared to be a sheriff's department break room, looking confused but unharmed. He showed the screen to Howard and Eleanor, fury and fear battling for dominance. "They took her from school. They involved my daughter." Howard's expression hardened. "This crosses every line. We need to call the FBI, get state police involved." Jack shook his head, his military training cutting through the emotional haze. "No time. And we don't know how high Bennett's influence reaches. For all we know, those men at the school could be federal agents. I need to make the exchange." "What they're asking for isn't just some historical curiosity," Eleanor warned. "If Project Helios was as dangerous as William believed, putting it in Bennett's hands could have catastrophic consequences." Jack stared at Lily's photo, his daughter's brave attempt at a smile breaking his heart. "I don't have a choice. She's all I have left." Howard put a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You're not doing this alone. I've got a plan." They spent the next 30 minutes in rapid preparation. Howard called friends, former military contacts, now working private security, while Eleanor reached out to her network of historians and journalists, people who could ensure that whatever happened wouldn't simply disappear from public record. Jack contacted Vernon Price, the local journalist known for his relentless pursuit of uncomfortable truths, and laid out enough of the situation to pique his interest. "If we don't walk out of this, there will be too many witnesses for Bennett to silence," Howard explained. "And if we do, we'll have documentation of everything spread across too many hands to contain." Jack checked his watch. 20 minutes until the exchange. He loaded the microfilm reels back into the lockbox, then scribbled a quick note on a piece of paper which he folded and handed to Eleanor. "If something happens to me, give this to Lily when she's older. It explains everything I found, everything William did." Eleanor tucked it into her pocket, her eyes damp but resolute. "William would be proud of you, Jack. He always said foster men were born with steel in their spine and justice in their hearts." Jack managed a tight smile. Let's just hope we're also born with good luck. Howard's phone buzzed with confirmation that his security contacts were in position around the store, maintaining distance but ready to intervene if necessary. Vernon Price was parked 2 blocks away, camera at the ready. Everything was set. As they approached Oak Ridge, General Jack could see Sheriff Miller's cruiser parked out front alongside a now familiar black SUV. Maxwell Bennett stood on the porch, his perfect suit incongruous against the weathered storefront. Behind him, partially visible through the window, Jack could make out Lily seated at the counter, a deputy standing nearby. The sight of his daughter in Bennett's power sent a wave of cold fury through Jack's veins. He had faced enemy fire, disarmed explosives, rebuilt bridges, while bullets flew overhead, but nothing had prepared him for the helpless rage of seeing his child used as leverage. Howard parked a block away as planned. Remember, we've got eyes on every exit. If they try anything, we've got backup. Just stick to the plan. Jack nodded, clutching the lockbox tightly. If this goes sideways, get Lily out first. Nothing else matters. He walked the final block alone, each step deliberate, his military bearing returning fully. Bennett watched his approach with the satisfied expression of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Foster," Bennett called as Jack reached the porch steps. "I'm glad we could arrange this meeting. Unfortunate circumstances, but necessary ones." Jack's voice was ice. "Let my daughter go, now." Bennett smiled thinly. "Of course, as soon as you hand over what you found. All of it, the microfilm, the logbook, and most importantly, the location of the package William was protecting." Jack held up the lockbox. "I have the films and the book, but there's nothing in them about the package location. William never wrote it down." Bennett's smile faltered slightly. "Don't play games, Foster. William wouldn't have left this earth without ensuring the information survived, because he trusted me to figure it out," Jack replied, the realization dawning as he spoke. "He left clues, not explicit directions. Insurance that only the right person would find it." Frustration flickered across Bennett's carefully controlled features. "Then you'll help us locate it. Your grandfather was playing with forces beyond his understanding. Project Helios was military technology, not something for a shopkeeper to hide away based on misguided conscience." Jack's eyes narrowed. "You don't want to contain it. You want to replicate it. Your defense industry connections would pay billions for technology that could render nuclear material permanently unusable. The perfect anti-nuclear weapon, or something much worse if the science is modified." "Enough philosophy," Bennett snapped. "The exchange, now." Jack held his ground. "Lily walks out first, then you get the box." Bennett considered him for a moment, then nodded to the deputy inside. The store door opened and Lily stepped out, her small face lighting up at the sight of her father. "Dad," she called, starting to run toward him. Bennett smoothly intercepted her, placing a restraining hand on her shoulder. "The box first, Foster." Jack's gaze locked with Lily's. In that silent moment, something passed between them. Trust, courage, the unspoken language of a father and daughter who had already weathered storms together. Almost imperceptibly, Jack nodded. Lily stomped hard on Bennett's polished shoe, then ducked under his arm with the nimbleness of a child accustomed to playground games. She ran straight to Jack, who dropped to one knee, wrapping one arm around her while keeping the lockbox raised in his other hand. Bennett's face darkened with fury. "The box, Foster. Now or Sheriff Miller will have cause to arrest you for theft of classified government materials." Jack rose slowly, keeping Lily behind him. "There's a problem with that, Bennett. I've already ensured copies of everything are in the hands of journalists, historians, and my military contacts. Arrest me, and by tomorrow morning, Project Helios will be headline news across the country." Bennett's composure cracked genuine fear, replacing his controlled anger. "You have no idea what you're doing. That information was classified for a reason. If certain elements knew this technology existed, they'd do exactly what you're doing," Jack cut him off. "Try to obtain it, weaponize it, use it for power or profit or worse. My grandfather understood that. It's why he and others created an entire network to keep it hidden." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his expression troubled. "Bennett, you said this was about national security, about preventing sensitive historical information from falling into the wrong hands. You never mentioned using a child as leverage." Bennett ignored him, his focus entirely on Jack. "I'll ask one more time. Where is the package William hid? Jack's mind raced, connecting pieces of the puzzle that had been scattered before him. William's last coherent message, final resting place prepared. The tunnels beneath Oak Ridge stretching far beyond the store itself. The Trinity photograph with its hidden significance. The answer came to him with startling clarity. It's not here, it never was. Bennett's eyes narrowed. You're lying. Jack shook his head slowly. William was smarter than that. He wouldn't keep something so dangerous beneath a public building where construction or renovations might accidentally uncover it. No, he'd put it somewhere it would never be disturbed. A cold certainty settled in Jack's gut. It's in the old cemetery, isn't it? Under his wife's grave. The flicker of recognition in Bennett's eyes confirmed Jack's theory. That's why you've been pushing the town council to relocate the cemetery for your development project. You knew all along it might be there, but you couldn't just dig up graves without cause. Bennett's mask of civility dropped, completely revealing the ruthless calculation beneath. The Helios device was government property created with taxpayer money for national defense. Your grandfather had no right to hide it away based on his personal moral qualms. Some weapons are too dangerous to exist, Jack said quietly, the words feeling as though they came from William himself. Some lines shouldn't be crossed even in the name of national security. My grandfather understood that. The scientists who created Helios understood it too. That's why they entrusted him with ensuring it would never be used. Bennett's hand moved toward his jacket, a motion Jack recognized from years in combat zones, the reach for a concealed weapon. In one fluid movement, Jack pushed Lily further behind him and prepared to throw the lockbox as a distraction. Before either man could act, Sheriff Miller's voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Bennett. There won't be any more threats and certainly no weapons. The sheriff had drawn his own gun, but it wasn't pointed at Jack, it was aimed squarely at Bennett. Bennett froze, incredulity washing over his features. Have you lost your mind, Miller? You know who I am, who I represent. Miller's expression remained grim. I know exactly who you are. I've spent 20 years looking the other way, while your family ran this town like a private fiefdom. But involving a child crosses a line I won't step over. Not even for you. The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of Howard's car, Eleanor in the passenger seat. From down the street came Vernon Price with his camera already recording. Bennett's carefully orchestrated confrontation was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. Jack seized the moment. It's over, Bennett. Too many witnesses, too many copies of the evidence. Whatever your plan was for the Helios technology, it dies here. Bennett's face contorted with cold fury. This isn't over, Foster. Not by a long shot. He turned and strode to his SUV, his security detail following quickly behind. The vehicle peeled away from the curb, leaving Sheriff Miller standing alone, his service weapon now lowered, but still in his hand. Miller holstered his gun with a weary sigh. I should arrest you for breaking into government property, Foster. Those tunnels under the store were part of a classified civil defense project. Jack met his gaze steadily. But you won't. The sheriff glanced at Lily, then back to Jack. No, I won't, but this isn't finished. Bennett has connections that reach far beyond Oak Ridge. He'll be back with paperwork and authority I can't ignore next time. Which is why we need to find the package first, Jack said firmly, and ensure it's secure somewhere even Bennett can't reach it. Miller studied him for a long moment. Your grandfather was a good man. Stubborn as hell, but good. I hope you know what you're doing, Foster. For your daughter's sake, if nothing else. The sheriff returned to his cruiser and drove away, leaving Jack standing on the porch of Oak Ridge General with Lily clinging to his side and the weight of William's final mission now squarely on his shoulders. Howard and Eleanor approached, their faces reflecting the gravity of what had just transpired. We've got maybe 24 hours before Bennett returns, with enough legal firepower to steamroll Miller and take control of both the store and the cemetery, Howard warned. Eleanor nodded in agreement. We need to move quickly. If the Helios device is really buried beneath Martha Foster's grave, we need to retrieve it tonight. Jack looked down at Lily, who was watching the adults with wide, solemn eyes. First, I need to get my daughter somewhere safe. This has already put her in enough danger. Lily tugged at his hand, her voice small but determined. I want to help Dad. Grandpa William was a hero, right? I want to help finish his mission. Jack's heart swelled with pride and fear in equal measure. The determination in her eyes was so like Sarah's, so like his own. the Foster steel spine that Eleanor had mentioned. Vernon Price approached camera still recording. I caught most of that on film. Want to tell me what's really going on here, Foster? What exactly was your grandfather hiding? Jack made a split-second decision. I'll give you an exclusive price. The full story once this is over. But for now, I need your help spreading some insurance. If anything happens to me or my daughter, you release everything immediately. The journalist nodded, professional interest mingling with genuine concern. Deal, and in the meantime, I can offer a safe house. My sister's cabin near the lake. No one would think to look for you there. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across Oak Ridge, Jack Foster stood at the crossroads of history and family legacy. In less than a week, he had gone from desperate father seeking a fresh start to the inheritor of a decades-old mission with potentially global implications. The weight of it should have been crushing, but instead it filled him with a clarity of purpose he hadn't felt since his military days. Watching Lily's small hand entwined with Eleanor's as they made preparations, Jack felt a certainty settle in his bones. William hadn't chosen him for this task because he was special or uniquely qualified. He had chosen Jack because he understood that some truths are protected not by the strongest walls, but by the most determined hearts. And a Foster would rather die than abandon their post, especially when the safety of future generations hung in the balance. With twilight approaching and Bennett's inevitable return looming, Jack gathered his unlikely allies, a historian, a carpenter, a journalist, and an 8-year-old girl with her father's determination, and prepared for what would surely be the most important mission of his life. The final stage of Operation Helios was about to begin, and this time there would be no burying the truth, only ensuring it served the right purpose, just as William would have wanted. Moonlight silvered the worn headstones of Oak Ridge Cemetery, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. The 4-acre plot sat on a gentle rise at the northern edge of town, surrounded by ancient oak trees that creaked and whispered in the autumn wind. Jack Foster crouched behind a weathered stone angel, his breath forming small clouds in the midnight air as he surveyed the perimeter. Vernon Price's sister's cabin had provided a brief sanctuary, allowing them precious hours to formulate a plan. Lily was safely tucked away there with Eleanor as guardian, the historian armed with both a shotgun and enough local influence to make any intruder think twice. Jack hated leaving his daughter, but the alternative, bringing her to a midnight grave excavation with unknown dangers, was unthinkable. Through night vision binoculars, Jack scanned the cemetery grounds. 2 figures patrolled the fence line, private security, hired by Bennett, no doubt. Their movements were professional, systematic, suggesting military or law enforcement background. Bennett wasn't taking chances. Howard's low whistle came from the tree line to Jack's right. The carpenter had circled around to approach from the rear of the property using the cover of the maintenance shed. Jack acknowledged with a subtle hand signal, then turned his attention to the third member of their improvised team. Sheriff Robert Miller knelt beside him, utility belt emptied of everything but essential equipment. The lawman had made his choice, not officially, nothing that would appear in any report, but he'd offered his help for this one night. A partial redemption, perhaps, for years of looking the other way, while the Bennett family exerted their influence over Oak Ridge. The plan was simple but precarious. Miller would create a diversion at the main gate, drawing the guards away long enough for Jack and Howard to access Martha Foster's grave. They had perhaps 30 minutes before Bennett's men would realize they'd been tricked, and likely less than an hour before Bennett himself arrived with reinforcements bearing official authority. Jack checked his watch, 12:17 a.m., the witching hour when the barrier between past and present felt thinnest, appropriate given they were about to disturb a grave in search of secrets buried for decades. Miller moved first, circling wide to approach the cemetery entrance. Jack and Howard held position, waiting for the signal. It came 3 minutes later, a police flashlight beam sweeping across the grounds, followed by Miller's authoritative voice carrying through the night. "Security breach at the north fence. I need assistance now." The guards responded as predicted, moving quickly toward the commotion. Jack and Howard seized the opening, sprinting in a low crouch across the moonlit grounds toward the oldest section of the cemetery. Martha Foster's grave occupied a modest plot beneath a spreading maple tree, marked by a simple headstone, bearing her name and the dates 1915 to 1988. Beside it stood William's newer marker, his remains having joined hers just months ago. Howard produced compact folding shovels from his backpack, handing one to Jack. "We dig at Martha's feet, not the head," he whispered. William would have wanted to rest his head next to hers, but the package at her feet. The earth was surprisingly soft, yielding easily to their tools. They worked in practiced silence, Howard's decades of manual labor evident in his efficient movements. Jack's military training served him equally well. He dug enough defensive positions under fire to know how to move earth quickly and quietly. 3 feet down, Jack's shovel struck something solid. Not the expected coffin, but metal, a steel plate covering the entire lower section of the grave. Howard brushed away the remaining soil, revealing a circular hatch similar to the one beneath the store, but smaller, embedded in the steel plate. The 8-rayed sun symbol was etched into its surface, positioned precisely where the key would fit. Jack removed the silver key from his pocket, its surface catching the moonlight as he aligned it with the indentation. The mechanism turned smoothly, as if it had been regularly maintained despite decades underground. The hatch opened with a soft hydraulic hiss, a sound that should have been impossible from a mechanism buried for years. Jack's flashlight beam revealed a narrow shaft descending about 6 feet with metal rungs embedded in one side. At the bottom, a small chamber had been carved into the earth and reinforced with concrete, just large enough for a man to stand in. Howard kept watch while Jack descended the ladder. The chamber was empty except for a stainless steel container, roughly the size of a bread box, sealed with the same locking mechanism as the hatch. Jack inserted the key again, hearing the satisfying click of tumblers falling into place. Inside lay a device unlike anything Jack had ever seen. It resembled a fat metallic disc about 8 inches in diameter and 3 inches thick, with a crystalline center visible through a small viewport. The surface bore no manufacturing marks, no serial numbers, just a single engraving of the now familiar sun symbol. Alongside it sat a leather-bound journal in a sealed envelope, with "For the Finder" written in William's hand. Jack secured the device and documents in his backpack, then climbed back to the surface. Howard helped him replace the earth, working frantically to erase evidence of their excavation. They had nearly finished when a sharp crack echoed across the cemetery, a warning shot from the direction of the entrance. Miller's diversion had run its course. Through the trees, Jack could see flashlight beams sweeping the grounds, moving methodically toward Martha's grave. They had perhaps 2 minutes before discovery. Howard pointed to a maintenance tunnel entrance, half concealed by overgrown shrubs 20 yards away. "Old drainage system. Connects to the town tunnels. It's our only shot." They sprinted toward the entrance, keeping low between the headstones. Jack reached it first, wrenching open the rusted grate and motioning Howard through. As the older man disappeared into the darkness, a shout rang out behind them. "There by the maintenance tunnel." A flashlight beam caught Jack in its glare. Without hesitation, he dove into the tunnel, pulling the grate closed behind him. Bullets pinged against the metal, the sound reverberating through the narrow space. Jack scrambled deeper into the darkness, following Howard's receding footsteps. The tunnel was barely 4 feet high, forcing them to hunch painfully as they moved. Decades of neglect had left it partially collapsed in sections thick with cobwebs and the musty smell of stagnant water. Jack's military-grade flashlight revealed brick walls glistening with moisture, the floor slick with organic matter he preferred not to identify. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, the tunnel widened into a junction. Howard paused, consulting a mental map of the underground network. "Left takes us toward downtown. Right eventually connects to the tunnels beneath the store, but it's the longer route." A distant shout echoed through the passageway behind them, followed by the splash of footsteps in water. Bennett's men had entered the tunnel system. Jack glanced at his watch, 1:03 a.m. They needed to reach the rendezvous point by 2:00 a.m., when Vernon Price would be waiting with a vehicle to take them to the state line. Howard took the lead, guiding them through a bewildering maze of passages. The tunnels predated most of Oak Ridge, originally built as a combination storm drainage system and bootlegging route during Prohibition. Later, they'd been expanded as part of civil defense preparations during the Cold War, creating an underground network that few current residents even knew existed. A noise ahead halted their progress. Howard raised a fist, the universal signal to stop. They pressed against the tunnel wall, killing their flashlights. In the absolute darkness, Jack's other senses heightened. He could hear the measured breathing of multiple individuals approaching from the junction ahead, smell the distinct odor of gun oil and tactical gear. Bennett had anticipated their escape route and positioned men to intercept them. They were being herded, forced toward a predetermined confrontation point. Howard's breath was warm against Jack's ear as he whispered instructions. Service shaft ahead, vertical climb about 15 feet, emerges in the basement of the old post office. They backtracked 50 yards to the overlooked access point, a narrow shaft barely wide enough for a man's shoulders with rusted rungs embedded in the concrete. Howard went first despite Jack's protests, his aged joints protesting audibly with each movement. Jack followed the weight of the backpack containing the Helios device, making the climb treacherous. The shaft ended at a metal plate that Howard pushed aside with difficulty. They emerged into the musty basement of Oak Ridge's abandoned post office, a building that had stood vacant for nearly a decade since mail operations consolidated to the new federal building across town. Howard led them up a narrow staircase to the main floor, where moonlight filtered through boarded windows, casting striped shadows across dusty sorting tables and empty mail cubbies. They moved cautiously toward the rear exit, aware that Bennett's men could be surrounding the building already. Jack's phone vibrated with a text from Vernon. Bennett at cemetery with federal agents, official-looking documents. Sheriff detained. Move to backup location now. The situation had escalated beyond their worst expectations. If Bennett had federal authority, they were no longer just evading private security, but potentially committing crimes against the government itself. Jack showed Howard the message, watching the older man's expression harden with resolve. "We need to split up," Howard decided. "You take the device and head for the backup location. I'll create a diversion, make them think we're both heading toward the highway." Jack shook his head vehemently. "Too risky. Bennett's men won't hesitate to use force." Howard's weathered face broke into a grim smile. "I didn't spend 40 years building houses without learning how to disappear into the woodwork when needed. Trust me, I can handle myself. Besides," he added, patting a bulge beneath his jacket that Jack recognized as a concealed weapon, "I'm not entirely defenseless." Reluctantly, Jack agreed to the plan. They synchronized watches 1:28 a.m. and set a new rendezvous for 3:00 a.m. at the abandoned hunting cabin Howard maintained 10 miles outside town. With a firm handshake that conveyed more than words, could they parted ways, Howard exiting through the front toward Main Street, Jack slipping out the rear toward the railroad tracks that would lead him to the edge of town. The night had grown colder, the temperature dropping toward freezing. Jack's breath formed thick clouds as he jogged along the tracks, staying low whenever headlights appeared on the parallel access road. The weight of the device in his backpack seemed to grow heavier, with each step a physical manifestation of the responsibility he'd inherited. He paused beneath a railroad trestle to check Williams' journal, hoping for guidance. The first pages contained technical specifications for the Helios device, its power source apparently self-sustaining through some process William described only as quantum regeneration, activation sequence, and containment protocols. The language was dense with scientific terminology beyond Jack's engineering background, but the implications were clear enough. Project Helios wasn't just a weapon or a counterweapon. It was something far more fundamental, a device capable of altering the basic properties of matter itself. The scientists who created it had intended it as a fail-safe, a way to neutralize nuclear material if it fell into enemy hands. But in the process, they discovered something that went beyond their original purpose, something with implications so profound that they'd chosen to bury it rather than risk its deployment. Williams' personal notes revealed the psychological toll of his mission. For decades, he'd served as guardian of a technology that could never be used, knowledge that could never be shared. He'd watched the Cold War escalate nuclear arsenals grow, knowing he possessed something that could render them obsolete or, if misused, create devastation beyond imagination. The final entry, dated just before Williams' cognitive decline began, read, "The burden passes now to Jack. I have arranged all the pieces left, all the clues. He has the strength to carry this weight, the wisdom to understand why it must remain hidden. Forgiveness comes not from bearing our mistakes, but from ensuring they are never repeated. The sun that gives life can also destroy it. Remember this, Jack, when the time comes to decide." Jack closed the journal, a profound sense of connection with his grandfather washing over him. William hadn't just been protecting a secret technology, he'd been protecting humanity from its own worst instincts. And now that mantle had passed to Jack. The sound of approaching vehicles jerked him back to the present. Headlights swept the area as a convoy of black SUVs moved slowly along the access road, searchlights probing the darkness. Jack pressed himself against the concrete support of the trestle, barely breathing, as the beams passed within feet of his position. When the vehicles had passed, he continued along the tracks with renewed urgency. The backup location was an old switching station, a mile ahead. A small brick building that had once housed equipment for controlling the railroad signals. Vernon would be waiting there assuming he hadn't been intercepted. Jack reached the building at 1:52 a.m., approaching cautiously from the rear. The structure appeared deserted, no vehicles visible, no lights within. He circled it once, checking for signs of surveillance or ambush before tapping lightly on the metal door in the prearranged pattern or 3 quick, 2 slow. The door opened just enough to admit him, Vernon's anxious face visible in the dim interior. The journalist wasn't alone. Eleanor was there, and beside her, her small face pale but composed, stood Lily. Jack's heart nearly stopped. What is she doing here? She was supposed to stay at the cabin. Eleanor's expression was grim. Bennett's men found us. We barely got out before they arrived. Vernon picked us up on the old logging road. Lily ran to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist with fierce determination. I wasn't scared, Dad. Eleanor showed me how to hide in the root cellar until the bad men left. She said I was brave like you and Grandpa William. Jack embraced his daughter's emotions warring within him. Relief at finding her safe, terror at how close she'd come to danger. And beneath it all, a burning anger at Bennett for involving a child in his obsessive pursuit. He knelt to Lily's level, examining her for any signs of trauma or injury. Finding none, he managed a reassuring smile. You are brave, Lil. Braver than I ever wanted you to have to be. Vernon interrupted the reunion with urgent news. Bennett's pulled out all the stops. He's got federal agents with him now. Department of Energy, FBI, maybe others. They're claiming national security jurisdiction over the Helios device. Sheriff Miller's been detained for obstruction. Jack absorbed this development grimly. What about Howard? Vernon shook his head. No word since he created a diversion downtown. Drew off at least 4 of Bennett's security team. Eleanor consulted her watch. The university contact is waiting at the state line. If we're going to make it before Bennett locks down all roads out of the county, we need to move now. Jack hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. If they fled with the device, they would be fugitives not just from Bennett, but from the federal government itself. Yet surrendering it meant placing potentially catastrophic power in the hands of people who might misuse it. Lily tugged at his sleeve, her young face impossibly serious. Dad, what would Grandpa William want us to do? The innocent question crystallized at everything. William had spent his life protecting this secret, ensuring it remained out of reach of those who would exploit it. He hadn't entrusted it to Jack only for him to surrender it at the first show of official authority. There's another option, Jack decided. We stop running and make a stand, not with violence but with the truth. The complete truth distributed so widely that no one can bury it again. Vernon's eyes lit up with journalistic fire. A simultaneous release to every major news outlet. I've got contacts at the AP Reuters major networks. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. And I can activate my network of historians and archivists. Digital preservation across multiple platforms impossible to completely erase. Jack opened his backpack, removing the Helios device and placing it carefully on the dusty table. We document everything, the device, the journals, the microfilm. We explain what it is, why William protected it, why it needs to remain secure. Vernon frowned. Bennett will claim national security, classify everything retroactively. Jack smiled grimly. Not if we demonstrate exactly what's at stake. Not if we make it impossible for them to operate in the shadows. The plan came together rapidly. Vernon would use his satellite uplink to transmit images and documentation to his media contacts. Eleanor would coordinate with her academic network to preserve and authenticate the historical record. Jack would prepare a complete statement explaining William's role and the ethical implications of the technology. But the crucial element came from an unexpected source. Lily, who had been quietly examining the device while the adults strategized, pointed to a small indentation on its underside that none of them had noticed. Look, there's a spot for the sun key here too. Jack examined where she indicated, finding a recessed keyhole bearing the 8-rayed sun. Unlike the locks on the hatch and box, this one was nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. He inserted the silver key, hesitated momentarily, then turned it. The device hummed to life, its crystalline center beginning to glow with a soft blue light. A holographic display projected from its surface technical schematics formulae and a video recording of a much younger William Foster standing alongside several men whose faces Jack recognized from history books about the Manhattan Project. This recording serves as authentication for Project Helios documentation. William's voice emerged from the device, strong and clear despite the decades that had passed since the recording. What follows is the complete technical specifications and test results for the quantum destabilization technology developed under Operation Sunburst in May 45. The recording proceeded to detail in scientific language so advanced that much of it was incomprehensible to those present exactly what the Helios device was capable of. In simplest terms, it could alter the fundamental binding forces within atoms, causing controlled disintegration of specific materials across a defined radius. It could render nuclear weapons permanently inert without detonating them, or if modified, potentially destabilize matter on a catastrophic scale. But the most damning revelation came in the final minutes of the recording when William and the other scientists explained their decision to remove the technology from official channels. We have determined that no existing political or military framework possesses sufficient ethical safeguards to be entrusted with this technology. The temptation to weaponize it would prove irresistible, potentially leading to consequences more devastating than the atomic weapons we originally sought to neutralize. Vernon was already filming his professional instincts taking over despite his shock at what they were witnessing. Eleanor stood transfixed, the historian in her recognizing the momentous nature of this revelation. Jack watched with a growing sense of both pride in his grandfather and certainty about what needed to be done. When the recording ended, the device powered down automatically, the key ejecting itself from the lock. Jack pocketed it, then turned to face the others. This is what Bennett wants, not just the device itself, but the knowledge of how it works. With this, his defense industry connections could develop technologies worth billions, all under the guise of national security. Vernon finished his recording, immediately beginning the process of transmitting the footage via encrypted channels. This changes everything. Once this gets out, Bennett won't be able to simply classify it and move on. There will be too many questions, too much scrutiny. Eleanor was already on her phone speaking rapidly to colleagues about secure digital archives and independent verification protocols. Jack knelt beside Lily, who had observed everything with the solemn attention of a child who understood more than adults might expect. "You helped us find the truth, Lil, just like Grandpa William wanted." Her small face glowed with pride. "Does this mean the bad men will stop chasing us now?" Before Jack could answer, headlights swept across the windows of the switching station. Vehicles were approaching from both directions on the access road, at least 3 judging by the lights. They had run out of time. Vernon looked up from his transmission equipment. 80% complete, need 3 more minutes for full upload. Jack made a rapid assessment of their options. The switching station had only 2 exits, both of which would soon be covered. There was no way all 4 of them could escape undetected. Someone would need to create a diversion, buying time for the others to complete the transmission and flee. Eleanor seemed to read his thoughts. "I'll go. They're less likely to use force against an old woman. I can stall them, claim I got lost, wandered in here seeking shelter." Jack shook his head. "Too risky. Bennett's men won't hesitate to detain you, and you're too valuable. Your academic credentials lend credibility to everything we're releasing." The decision crystallized in Jack's mind. He alone would confront Bennett, using the device itself as leverage. If Bennett wanted the Helios technology so badly, he'd have to negotiate for it in the open, with witnesses and documentation already spreading across the digital landscape. He quickly outlined the plan to the others. Vernon would complete the transmission, then escape with Eleanor and Lily through the maintenance tunnel that connected the switching station to the old rail yard. From there, they would make their way to the state line where Eleanor's university contact waited. Jack would confront Bennett, buying them the time they needed. Eleanor protested, but Jack was immovable. "This ends tonight, one way or another. William protected this secret for decades. I can protect it for a few more hours." He knelt again before Lily, whose brave face couldn't quite hide her fear. "I need you to go with Eleanor and Mr. Price, Lil. I'll catch up as soon as I can." "Dad, no," her voice quavered. "What if the bad men hurt you?" Jack brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, just as Sarah used to do. "They won't, because I have something they want. and because good people don't let bad things happen when they can stop them. That's what Grandpa William believed. That's what I believe too. Lily hugged him fiercely, then allowed Eleanor to lead her toward the maintenance tunnel entrance. Vernon followed, pausing only long enough to confirm the transmission was complete and to press a small object into Jack's hand, a miniature camera disguised as a button. Whatever happens, it'll be recorded. Live streamed to my backup server. Then Jack was alone, the Helios device secure in his backpack, William's journal in his pocket, and the silver key cool against his palm. Through the grimy windows, he could see the vehicles arraying themselves around the building, 3 black SUVs and a government sedan. Armed men took up positions at both exits, while a familiar figure emerged from the lead vehicle. Maxwell Bennett approached the main entrance, flanked by 2 men in suits, whose bearings screamed federal agents. Behind them came Sheriff Miller, his expression unreadable in the harsh glare of the headlights. Jack positioned himself in the center of the room, backpack at his feet, hands empty and visible. The door opened and Bennett stepped inside, his perfect suit incongruous in the dusty abandonment of the switching station. The federal agents followed, hands resting near concealed weapons. Sheriff Miller entered last, pointedly positioning himself slightly apart from the others. "So this is how it ends." Bennett's voice dripped with smug satisfaction. A desperate man cornered in an abandoned building, his accomplices fled, his options exhausted. Jack held the older man's gaze steadily. "Actually, this is how it begins. The full technical specifications of Project Helios, along with William's testimony about why it was hidden, have just been transmitted to major news outlets and academic institutions worldwide." Bennett's composure faltered for the first time, genuine alarm flashing across his features before he could suppress it. "You're bluffing. You couldn't possibly understand the technology well enough to," Jack interrupted by holding up the silver key. "I don't need to understand it." William made sure of that. He left a complete explanation recorded by the original scientists, authenticated and ready for public consumption. Right now, millions of people are learning about a quantum destabilization technology developed during the Manhattan Project, then deliberately buried to prevent its weaponization. One of the federal agents stepped forward, his voice sharp with authority. "Mr. Foster, I'm Special Agent Davis with the Department of Energy. You are in possession of classified materials relating to national security. Surrender them immediately and cooperation will be noted in your favor." Jack turned his attention to the agent. "Which agency do you really represent, Agent Davis? The DOE's Official Historical Records Division that doesn't exist, or one of Bennett's private contractors with borrowed credentials?" The agent's expression remained impassive, but his silence was telling. Bennett's facade of calm diplomacy cracked further. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, Foster. This technology has national security implications far beyond your comprehension. It belongs in proper hands, not buried in a cemetery by a man who had no authority to make such decisions." Jack felt an odd calm settling over him, the kind he'd experienced in combat when clarity emerges from chaos. "My grandfather and the other scientists made exactly the right decision. They created something that shouldn't exist, something too dangerous for any single government or corporation to control. So they chose to remove it from the equation entirely." He nudged the backpack with his foot. "The device is here. I'll surrender it on one condition: a public inquiry, transparent and independent, into Project Helios and its implications. No classified hearings, no buried reports. The world deserves to know what was created in its name and why it was hidden." Bennett's laugh was cold and dismissive. "You're not in a position to make demands, Foster. We have federal authority, armed agents, and jurisdiction over national security technology. You have what a misguided sense of moral superiority inherited from your grandfather." Jack stood his ground, unwavering. "I have the truth, and as of 8 minutes ago, so does the rest of the world. Check your phone, Bennett. It's already trending." Sheriff Miller, who had remained silent until now, pulled out his phone. His eyebrows rose as he scrolled through notifications. "He's right. It's hitting the wires now. Manhattan Project's hidden legacy, quantum weapon concealed for decades. Whistleblower reveals classified technology." Bennett snatched the phone, his face darkening as he confirmed Miller's report. His composure shattered completely, revealing the ruthless ambition beneath. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The panic this could cause, the geopolitical implications. You've potentially destabilized decades of nuclear deterrence policy. Jack shook his head slowly. No, I've ensured that no one person or organization can control this technology. I've fulfilled William's mission, keeping it out of the hands of those who would weaponize it while preserving the knowledge of what's possible. The scientific community can now discuss it openly, develop ethical frameworks, consider implications without secret agendas. He took a step forward, meeting Bennett's gaze directly. The world deserves the truth, Bennett. Not your version of it, not the government's version, but the complete, unfiltered truth. That's what William believed in. That's what I believe too. The federal agents exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence visibly wavering as the situation evolved beyond their briefing parameters. Sheriff Miller moved subtly, positioning himself between Jack and the increasingly unstable Bennett. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles broke the tension, not more black SUVs, but news vans. Vernon's media contacts had responded with remarkable speed. Bennett's opportunity for a quiet containment operation was evaporating by the second. Jack smiled, not with triumph, but with relief. William's burden had been carried to its conclusion, not buried again, but transformed into something new. A shared responsibility, a communal decision about knowledge too powerful for any individual to control. The weight hadn't been lifted, but distributed exactly as his grandfather must have intended. Bennett's face contorted with fury and desperation. This isn't over, Foster. There are powers beyond your imagination that will not allow this technology to remain in the public domain. Jack picked up the backpack, holding it out toward Sheriff Miller rather than Bennett or the federal agents. Maybe, but they'll have to operate in the light now, not the shadows, and that makes all the difference. As Miller took custody of the device, camera lights blazed through the windows of the switching station. The world was watching now. Whatever happened next would happen in full view, not buried beneath decades of secrecy and classification. William's final mission was complete. The truth, with all its complexity and danger, was finally free. And somewhere in that blaze of light, Jack felt certain his grandfather was smiling.